Hello, everyone. Welcome to another series on literary criticism. Today, we are going to discuss about the Greek philosophers. When we talk about literary criticism as a discipline, we are essentially going back to ancient Greece, where literature was not just written, it was questioned, debated, and philosophically examined. The earliest Greek critics were not just critics that we see in the modern sense. They were philosophers who reflected deeply on poetry, drama, and art. So, after our basic introduction to literary criticism, today in this video, we are moving to one of the earliest and the most important figures in the history of thoughts, Socrates. Now, before we begin, let me tell you one thing very honestly. Socrates is not important because he wrote many books. In fact, it is a very interesting part. He did not write philosophical books himself, and still, he became one of the greatest names in the history of philosophy. Now, that itself teaches us something. It tells us that a person becomes great not because he writes a lot, but because he changes the way people think. Socrates is known as the father of philosophy. Now, students, when you hear this title, Father of Philosophy, you should immediately ask, why is Socrates given this distinction? He is called as the father of philosophy because he made people question life in a very serious way. He did not just accept whatever society said. He asked, what is truth? What is justice? What is goodness? What is knowledge? What is virtue? Now, consider two classrooms. Now, imagine that in the first classroom, where the teacher just asks you to memorize this answer. She's given you answer and asked you to memorize an answer. Now, imagine another teacher who says, no, first tell me, why do you think that this answer which I have given you is true? You need to think critically on it. Now, tell me, which teacher makes you think more deeply? Of course, the second one. That is Socratic spirit. Dear friends, I have presented in front of you a few quotes that is by Socrates. Socrates said, I know one thing, that I know nothing. The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. Now, this is very important and a very famous quote connected to Socrates. At first, students may feel that this is very strange. If we know nothing, then why is he famous? But the meaning is very deep over here. Socrates is not just saying, I am useless. He is saying that I am wise enough to know that human knowledge is limited. He's actually intellectually human. Let me make this more clear to you. Suppose a student says, Ma'am, I know this whole chapter perfectly. Then you ask that student a few questions, like two or three questions, and the students gets confused. Now, what has happened? The student had confidence, but not the real understanding. Now, suppose there is another student who has read the whole chapter very thoroughly. He said, Ma'am, I have read the whole chapter, but I still want to understand it more clearly. The second student is actually closer to real thinking. So, when Socrates says, I know nothing, he means, I do not pretend to know what I do not know. In ordinary life, also, many problems happen because people are too sure of the half knowledge that they have. For example, someone would read on a WhatsApp forward and become expert in news and history. Someone watches a short video on medicine and will pretend to be expert in medicine. Someone hears one rumor and will become expert in politics. Socrates would challenge all these false confidence. Socrates also said that I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. This line is also very beautiful. And as a teacher, we can relate to it very well. Socrates means real education is not just filling a student's head with information. Real education is awakening the mind. A teacher cannot simply pour wisdom into another person's life, like water into a bottle. The teacher can guide, ask questions, provoke thought, remove the confusion of the student, but it is the student who has to think. For example, if I simply tell you Plato disliked poetry, you might memorize it. But if I ask you that why would a philosopher distrust poetry? What kind of poetry was he thinking of? Does the poetry really mislead or does it reveal truth? Can imagination be dangerous? Then you will start to begin to think. And once you think, you will remember it more better. That is what Socrates believed. So, students, remember one thing: the best teacher is not the one who gives the maximum notes, but the one who makes you ask better questions. Now, before we understand the ideas of Socrates, let's take a moment to look at the background of Socrates. Socrates was born in Athens around 469 BC. Athens at that time was one of the most vibrant intellectual centers of the ancient world. It was a city alive with politics, public debates, powerful speeches, philosophical discussions, and new forms of education. People gathered in the marketplaces and public spaces to argue, question, and persuade each other. Ideas were not very private, they were public performances. So, Socrates, he belonged to a culture where discussion and argument were already valued. But the key difference is that while others use debate to win argument, Socrates used question to seek the truth. He did not just participate in this culture of discussion, he actually transformed it. He pushed questioning through, beyond rhetorics and turned it into a method of deep inquiry. Now, I'll read it for you. Socrates was known as the father of philosophy. But the irony here is he never wrote any essay or anything regarding philosophy. Socrates authored no text and is known mainly through the posthumous accounts of classical writers, particularly his students, Plato and Xenophon, and his only contemporary, Aristophanes. These accounts were written as dialogues in which Socrates and his interlocutors examine a subject in the style of question and answer. They gave rise to Socratic dialogue, a literary genre. Contradictory accounts of Socrates make a reconstruction of his philosophy nearly impossible, a situation which is known as Socratic problem. Don't worry, we will deal with all these terms one by one. Socrates was a polarizing figure in the Athenian society. In 399 BC, he was accused of impiety and corrupting the youth. Now, what is a polarizing personality? A polarizing personality is a figure or a person whose action, belief, or personality divide opinions into extreme opposing ideas or sides. Somebody might love him, somebody might dislike him. Okay, polarizing personality. Now, let me tell you what is Socratic dialogue. Sorry, Socratic problem. Before that, I would also like to share one information about Socrates with you. Socrates was known for attracting attention not because of his appearance, but almost in spite of it. He was widely considered physically unattractive, simple, even rough looking, and showed very little concern for how he dressed or presented himself. Most importantly, he was deeply indifferent to material pleasure, luxury, fashion, comfort, external display. These led or held no real values in his life. Now, why did I tell you this detail? I told it because it reveals something fundamental about his philosophy. Socrates was not interested in outward show. He believed that focusing too much on appearance distract us from what truly matters, the development of the mind and the soul. Even today, we often see that people are more concerned with how they look than how they really think. Socrates quietly overturns this priority. His message is very clear. He did not spend all his efforts decorating the body. Actually, he invested in educating the soul. Of course, this does not mean that neglecting oneself. Rather, it is a reminder that inner life or our thoughts, values, and understanding they deserve far greater attention than our outward glamour. Suppose one person looks very polished, speaks stylish English, wears expensive clothes, but he has shallow thinking. And another person is there who looks very ordinary, speaks simply, but thinks deeply and honestly. Now tell me, whom would Socrates value more? Obviously, the second one. That is the difference. Now, as I told you, Socrates, he did not write anything himself. Actually, it was written by his philosophers or his students, Plato and Xenophon. Now, let me talk to you about Socratic problem. The Socratic problem means that Socrates, he did not write his own philosophy. And because different writers describe him differently, it becomes difficult to know exactly what the historical Socrates really thought. Now, the problem is that whatever we know about Socrates, it's come from other people, and each present him very differently. Now, as I told you, that his contemporaries or his students, Plato and Xenophon, told it. We know about Plato about only through. We know about Socrates only through Plato and Xenophon. Now, Plato, he is famous student of Socrates, and he presents Socrates as a deep philosophical thinker, almost an idealized figure. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates often speaks ideas that may actually belong to Plato himself. Xenophon, on the other hand, shows a more practical, more teacher, simpler, less abstract than Plato's Socrates. Aristophanes, who was the contemporary, in his works like Clouds, he mocked Socrates. He portrayed as a sophist and a ridiculous intellectual. Now, each sources they give us different kind of Socrates. Plato's Socrates is more philosophical. Xenophon's Socrates is more practical, and Aristophanes' Socrates is more comic. Now, this is the challenge. Imagine three people are describing the same teacher. One admires him deeply, one respects him casually, and one makes fun of him. Will all the three descriptions be identical? Of course not. This is exactly our situation with Socrates. So, the Socratic problem, it reminds us that even the father of philosophy comes to us not directly, but through voices that interpret him. And our task is to read carefully, compare, and think critically. Let's talk about Xenophon. Xenophon discusses Socrates in his works such as Memorologia, a little hard word it is, then Oikonomicus, Symposium, and Apology of Socrates. You don't have to learn it by heart, just go through it. In his work, Memorable Thoughts of Socrates, it is a collection of dialogues and stories intended to defend Socrates against charges of impiety and corrupting the youth, showcasing his practical wisdom and ethical teaching. The second one is household management. In this, there is a dialogue focusing on practical household management, farming, and the roles of men and women, with Socrates as the main interlocutor. Now, the third one is the banquet, a dialogue portraying a drinking party among Socrates and his friends, offering a lighter, conversational view of his philosophy on love and virtue, distinct from Plato's symposium. Apology of Socrates to the jury. Xenophon's version of Socrates, that is the legal defense during his trial, emphasizing Socrates' calm acceptance of death and arrogant or dignified posture towards his accusers. Now, the next one is Socrates' disciple Plato. In this, uh, Plato is telling that Socrates, he has portrayed Socrates through his dialogues. And his major dialogues are Apology, Crito, Phaedo, Symposium, Ion, Phaedrus, and Republic. So, when we see that Plato's Socrates, they often feel more sharper, more intellectually dramatic, more playful, and more philosophical. Whereas Xenophon's Socrates is more duller, less humorous, and less ironic than Plato's. Okay, Xenophon, he gives us a more picture of Socrates, which is more practical, straightforward, and less complex. Now, let's turn to Aristophanes. Aristophanes is the one who is the contemporary of Socrates. Aristophanes was a comic playwright. His famous work, The Cloud, presents Socrates in a satirical, exaggerated, mocking way. It gives us a caricature of Socrates leaning towards sophism and ridicules him of an absurd atheist. Now, this is a caricature. A caricature is an exaggerated and often humorous portrayal of a person, highlighting certain traits to make him look more ridiculous or absurd. Now, how is Socrates caricatures? In Aristophanes' work, The Cloud, Socrates is shown as a strange, absent-minded intellectual, a thinker who studies useless things like clouds and air, someone who runs a thinkery, a school of sophistry, a teacher who trains students to make the wrong argument appear right. He is even depicted as a hanging in a basket, thinking about the heavens, and imagine meant to mock his detachment from reality. So Aristophanes and Socrates, they were contemporaries, while his disciples like Plato and Xenophon's respective Socrates, but Aristophanes, he presented him as a dangerous intellectual. Aristophanes portrayed Socrates as a sophist running a school of trickery, contributing significantly to the negative public perception that led to Socrates' trial. His work, The Clouds, in this display is a primary source of anti Socratic sentiments at the time, accusing him of making the weaker argument the stronger. Aristophanes continued to lampoon Socrates in his other plays like The Birds and the Frogs. Plato's Apology suggests that the long standing false reputation created by Aristophanes' comedies heavily influenced the jury to later on sentence Socrates' death. Now, you've seen the caricature. Let's move on to Socratic philosophy. Now, Socrates' philosophy was mainly concerned with ethics and the pursuit of knowledge. That means that he was not mainly asking, how rich can I become? How can I become popular? How can I win any argument? He was actually asking, what is the good life? What is virtue? What is justice? How should one actually live? So, ethics means the study of right conduct, moral behavior, and goodness. Suppose two people are equally successful, but one is selfish, dishonest, and arrogant, and the other one is fair, truthful, and responsible. Who is a better human being? This is a very ethical question. Socrates believed that the quality of the soul matters more deeply. He also linked knowledge with virtue. He thought that many people do wrong because they do not truly understand the good. Now, whether we fully agree with this or not, it is a very important idea by Socrates. Now, I have also written in front of you sophism. Now, sophism is a false argument that looks correct but is actually wrong. And as a clever but deceptive use of words to win the debates. This is very important. A sophism is like an argument that would sound smart on the surface, but inside it is more weak or false. For example, imagine someone says, everybody on social media is saying, so it must be true. Does that sound convincing to some people? Yes. Is it logically strong? No. Or suppose someone says he speaks English fluently, so whatever he must say is correct. Again, impressive. Maybe, but not logically sound. That is the difference between appearance of truth and the actual truth. Socrates did not like such shallow cleverness. He wanted genuine reasoning, not verbal tricks. So, if a person uses difficult words just to confuse the students or the audience and win the debate, that is a sort of thing Socrates would question again. Very relevant in today's talk days, right? Now, let's move on to Socratic method. Now, this is yet another important exam and concept. Now, Socratic method is a method of inquiry through series of questions and answer, not just random questioning, carefully directed question. The purpose is to test the idea, expose the contradiction, remove false confidence, and move towards deeper understanding. Imagine there is a question, what is honesty? The answer would be telling the truth. Socrates would say that is it always right to tell the truth even if it harms somebody? Now, the definition becomes more nuanced. This is Socratic method. He does not immediately say that what you have said is a wrong answer. He makes the other person discover the weakness in their own statements. This method is very brilliant because he teaches thinking, not just mugging up. Socrates used question answer dialogue and he also used refutation method. In question answer, he would say a question unfolds through continuous questioning. What do you mean by justice? Is that always true? Can you give an example? This process is called as dialectic. The other one is refutation method or elenquis. Socrates would ask a person to define something, example virtue. Now he will show inconsistencies in their answer. Now this would lead them to realize their own ignorance. Now let's move to Socratic method. One thing also is there that people they were very irritated by Socrates because Athens they often presented themselves as wise even when they had really little knowledge, and Socrates he became a kind of nuisance to important people. Think of a public life even today. Many people like being respected as experts, but they do not like being questioned very deeply. If someone constantly asks them, how do you know this? What exactly do you mean by this? Is this really true? Are you contradictory? Are you contradicting yourself? Then such a person may be respected by some, but will start be disliking by many. Socrates disturbed comfort. He disturbed the false certainty. He disturbed the ego of the people. And society often becomes uncomfortable when someone exposes their pretense. Socrates, he challenged those who claimed wisdom. Upper class people felt that he was publicly humiliating them. This is again very human. People can tolerate being wrong in private, but they hate when they are being exposed in public. So Socrates' questioning had social consequences. This is important because philosophy was not just abstract, it affected pride, status, power, and their reputations. So his questioning was not harmless to the social order, it embarrassed the influential people. And once powerful people feel threatened, danger begins. Now, let's talk about the trial of Socrates. Socrates was brought to trial in 399 BC. He was charged with corrupting the youth and was sentenced to death by drinking hemlock poison. Now, what does corrupting the youth mean? It means that the authorities they believed that he was influencing young people in a very dangerous way, making them challenge tradition, authorities, and accepted beliefs. Was he really corrupting them? Socrates would say, no, he was actually teaching them to think. But that is often the problem. Authoritarian minds call questioning as corruption. If young people merely obey society, feels safe. If young people start questioning why, some people they become afraid. That is why Socrates becomes a symbol of intellectual courage. And another important point is that he had the chance to escape, but he refused. Why? Because he believed in the principle. He would not save his body by betraying his values. That makes his death morally powerful. He died, but his ideas survived. According to Plato's Phaedo, Socrates' final words were, Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt. Now, Asclepius is the god of medicine and healing. Offering a rooster was a thanksgiving sacrifice after discovery from illness. Socrates says life is a kind of illness and death is the cure. Now, throughout Phaedo, Socrates argue that the soul is immortal. The body distracts from truth. So, death frees the soul from bodily limitations, a healing of the soul. Now, let's come to Socratic dialogues. I would also like to tell about Socratic dialogues. There are few Socratic dialogues that we see from the Plato, but this we will discuss in the next video when we will discuss more about Plato. So, students, let us quickly revise whatever we have understood. Socrates was born in Athens around 469 BC. He was called the father of philosophy, not a writer of book, but a powerful thinker known through Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes. He focused on ethics, truth, and knowledge. He was famous for his Socratic methods. Someone who questioned false wisdom. He was tried in 399 BC and he was sentenced to death by drinking hemlock. So, one thing that we have learned from here, do not pretend to know what you do not know. Question clearly, think deeply, live ethically. So, today we began our journey into literary criticism by going back to its very roots with Socrates. Now, it's question time. Tell me, which among the following plays by Socrates is an attack on the modern education and morals as imparted and taught by the radical intellectuals known as the sophists? Is it clouds? Is it wasp? Is it knights? Is it Acranians? It is clouds. Now, another question. Which of the following plays gained notoriety for its caricature of Socrates, portraying him as a sophist like figure running a thinkery? where dubious intellectual practices are taught? Tell me. It is the clouds. Okay. In clouds, the unjust argument represents as what? Is it traditional morality? Is it sophist rhetoric and moral relativeness? Is it religious orthodoxy or is it political conservatism? It is sophist rhetoric and moral revelations. So, finally, thank you everyone for your attention. Keep questioning, keep thinking, just as Socrates would want you to. And in the next video, we will talk about Plato.